Do you want to start with your bit?
Oh, and we're back.
And we're back. Hi, Jay.
Oh, happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday to you. So today we're going to do a little bit of preamble into how we can cast our gaze on a chart, look at the houses and read them in a different way. Because a lot of people are accustomed to look at it sequentially, like from houses 1 to 12. But there are different ways to look at it. And different charts demand different kind of attention from us. Even when we open it, suddenly, for example, we'll see a cluster of planets on one side of the chart. The chart is actually demanding of us to pay attention in a different way. So by learning these 6 different methods of casting our gaze on a chart, it can help us to look at the chart in a different way, read it in a different way, and different kinds of readings will demand of us to look at the chart in a different manner also. So we're just gonna kind of do an overview of different ways of looking at the houses in a chart.
Yeah, sounds good because I think we've been doing that in a few of our videos. So
Yeah, it'd be kind of good to explain it once and for all. So should I give an overview of the topics we're going to cover and then just cover them one by one?
yeah,
All
I
right,
guess
so
this will probably be more of a prescribed type of video,
this is a what?
like a set type of, because you're going through the actual technique, I guess.
Yeah, it's a kind of a technique. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So one of the first methods that we can use in looking at a chart is to look at the 4 anchor points of the chart and look at the connecting houses to them and see how they support each other or how they're negating from this anchor point. I'll explain all of these in a minute. I'm just going through the outline of it. Then we can look at the different sectors of the charts, which there are 4 sectors: the self, the private life, others, and our public life. The next method is to look at the 6 axes or the 6 sets, because there are 12 houses and they have a spectrum, like from the 1st house to the 7th house. This is another way of reading a chart, the houses. And then we can look at the houses based on goals of life, because every house is related to one of the 4 goals of life. We can look at the charts based on the primary and the secondary motion of the chart, as if the houses can go clockwise or counterclockwise. So going counterclockwise is going from houses 1 to 12. Going clockwise, just like the way the nodes, for example, move, is to go from house 12 to 1. Okay. And then we can look at the primary house to house aspects. This is an important thing to always keep in mind too. And the primary aspects are trines, squares, oppositions, and sextiles. So let's start with the first one, where we're going to look at the 4 anchor points of the chart and see how the houses next to them either support them or negate them, or what the significance of this is. So the 4 anchor points of the chart are houses 1, 4, 7, and 10. So let's take the sector that's related to the self, which includes houses 12, 1, and 2. The houses beside them, there's always one house that is considered below the anchor point and another house that's above the anchor point. The house that's below the anchor point is always going to come and support that anchor point, and the house that's above it negates, reduces, deduces, or erodes the significations of the first house. So for example, in the first house, we're becoming manifest and coming into existence. The supporting house, which is below it, the second house, all of the significations of the second house, when we pay attention, it's actually supporting what is supposed to happen in the first house. So it is giving it, it's almost like nourishing it, energizing it, giving it resources so that anchor point can do all the things that it's supposed to do. And the anchor points are super important because they're talking about the 4 primary aspects of our lives that pretty much defines what it means to be human. Like in the sector about the self above the chart, the self is the self being manifest in the world, or identity, or personhood, or sense of self. To even have this self-referential thing to say, I am, I want. It's saying something about that sector of the chart. Opposing it on the bottom of the chart, we have the sector that has to do with others. So this is a very important aspect of our lives, is how do we interact with other people. In the sector, which is the private sector of the chart, and the camera have to go the opposite way, houses 3, 4, and 5 is talking about our psychological development, the self that came into existence. What is interiority? How is it getting to know itself, become itself? How does it get to express itself, for example, in the 5th house? In the 3rd house, how does it understand its own needs and meet its own needs? And then there's that other sector, the 10th house, which includes the public aspect of our lives, which the anchor point's the 10th house. We have 9, 10, and 11. This is saying something about how we negotiate and engage with society and the social aspects of life. So if we think about it, these 4 anchor points are saying something about our human experience. So the houses that sit below the anchor points are supporting it. And for example, let's go back to the 12th, first and second. While the second is giving all the support that the first house needs, the 12th house is saying something about negating, eroding, or deducing the significations of the first, because the first is all about how do we materialize in the world, whereas the 12th house is saying how do we become immaterial, or how do we manifest from that immaterial, just the soul component that's prior to birth. How do we take our birth and our shape in the first house to be born? So we can see this kind of a dynamic in all of the anchor points.
People understand like an anchor point is basically like what's keeping the thing, like even in real life, right? If you have an anchor, it's holding the boat in place. It's stabilizing the whole chart.
Yes.
So your anchor points in the chart are stabilizing, like how you put an anchor for to hold a boat.
Yes. And it's signifying a very significant aspect of our lives and what it means to be human. Like in the sector or in the section of the chart about the self, the anchor point, the first house, is saying something about ourselves, that we exist. That very fact is very important. It's gonna, you need to exist to have relationship with other people, to have a psychology, to have a career. So yeah, all of the anchor points are saying something fundamental about being human and existing. And then the houses next to them come to be saying, well, what do these anchor points, what do these areas of life need? Or how do we change the direction from it to go to the next set, which becomes those houses that are attached to them. So let's just, for the sake of simplicity, say the anchor points, as we said, are houses 1, 4, 7, and 10, right? The second house supports the first house. The 12th house erodes the first house. When we go to the 4th house, the house that supports the anchor point, which is the 4th house, is the 5th house. And the one that negates or deduces from it or takes from it for itself is the 3rd house, okay? The 4th house is all about, for example, our psychological makeup, our internal being, our emotions, our private spaces like the domestic space, our home. That facet of our lives where we feel rooted within comes from the 4th house. The 5th house is a love house, is how do we take those internal feelings and our internal self, offer it and express it to someone else, let's say our romantic partner or our children, and we make them part of our family. It's almost like taking our interiority and expanding it. You know, your home has a beautiful garden. That garden is still part of your home, but it's external to the inside of the home. So the 5th house is kind of expressing this kind of an expansion of our interiority to our very, I guess, immediate environments, like those that we love and our children. So it's essentially still supporting the 4th house matters, the 5th house. It's almost encompassing something close to us that is an extension of our interiority. Now, on the other hand, the 3rd house comes to take away from the 4th house. So in a sense is negating or deducing the significations of the 4th house. It's taking the resources of that root, that family resource that we have, all of our emotional aspects of how do we do for ourselves and, let's say, make our dreams come true. You know, how do we make our thoughts into something tangible in the world? So we're actually using the resources of the 4th to do stuff for our personal self. In that sense, it's changing the direction of what the 4th house is trying to do. The 4th house is trying to go deep within and get rooted within. The 3rd house is extracting from the root to
Can you
be.
give an example of that?
Yeah.
Like in the 12th and the 1st is it's kind of easier to understand because the 12th you're kind of giving it's spiritual, like you're giving up everything, you know, like you're ready to go.
Or
But
you've been gone and you're remanifesting from 12th to 1st. You're remanifesting back into the world.
Yeah.
It's like reincarnating back from the 12th is that moment right before reincarnation, whereas the 1st house is that you have incarnated back into life, into your manifest form. In the 4th house, let me give an example. The 4th house is our family, right? The 3rd house let's say one who has a child, the way that child will take the resources of the
Okay.
fourth house, the family, to be able to make their own dreams manifest. For example, the third house represents our skill sets and our ability to learn and take instructions. Your child from the fourth house wants to learn how to do music, for example. Now you have to emotionally and in every possible way as a parent invest into that child and give them the resources that they need so that they can make this desire and ambition within them to become something tangible in the world. So they're exhausting the fourth house. They're taking the resources of the fourth house in order to make something that they need, something real in the world. Do you see how the fifth house is kind of
So is it like also buying a house? Like, isn't it like your home, your physical home is in the fourth, and you have
it's
to
in the
use
fourth?
you had to use resources to buy that home?
It's not talking about material resources, it's talking about emotional and
Okay.
psychological resources. For example, in one of the other videos, we used the example of a child learning how to play the trumpet or the violin, and it can be horrendous, right?
Yeah.
As a parent, you have to emotionally endure that, at the same time support them and give them love and encourage them to do it. It's coming at your expense, but you're letting them do that thing and you're supporting them to do it in the third house so that it becomes a skill set that they have. So it becomes a kind of a tool in their toolkit that they have in life. So it's talking about that kind of a support. The financial support goes from the first to the second house to the first house
Oh yeah, that's
to
right.
the individual. This is more of like psychological, emotional support, how you feel rooted and grounded in life. You know, that's the fourth house matters.
Okay.
When you think about it, fifth house is nurturing the fourth house, is expanding its realm of possibility and horizon. You know, the fourth house is about devotion, the fifth house is about love. So it's about expression of that devotion, which can also expand your heart. When you love other people, your internal space also grows and flourishes. So the fifth house is contributing to the interiority of the fifth house, whereas the third house is diffusing it. It's distributing its energy. It's not concentrating it. That's what the above houses do. They diffuse the energy of the anchor point and they don't let it be so concentrated and potent. It's almost like they're trying to redirect it to another part of life.
Mhm.
So that's the dynamic of this private sphere of life, which includes these houses. Now let's move to the segment of the chart that has to do the other anchor point, which has to do with the seventh house being the anchor point, the descendant. This is now where the sun sets. In the first house, the sun rises. And the house that is below the seventh house and supports the seventh house is the sixth house. And the house that is negating, deducing, eroding the significations of the seventh house or the eighth house. So when you think about the sixth house, I've said this in other videos, from houses 1 to 5, it's almost as if the world is about us. The first house, we're manifest. Second house, people are supporting us. Third house, how do we make our own wishes and dreams and thoughts come true? Fourth house, we got family, we're grounded. Fifth house, we're loved. Suddenly you open the door to the sixth house and it's like nothing is about you anymore, child. It's all about everybody else. And this is related to the seventh house because the seventh house is literally the house of the others, is where we're supposed to get married, merge with another person, constantly cooperate with other people. We have to orbit other people. We're no longer the center like the way we were in the first house and everything orbits us. So the sixth house is a preparatory phase for this. It just takes you right away to the grind and the grime of the other. Not just how to cooperate, but how do you make yourself of service to others? How do you become even subservient to others? So suddenly we're thrown, the direction of the chart suddenly changes when we get to the sixth, to the bottom of the chart. So it's preparing us for the seventh house. And for this reason, we can see how the sixth house is supporting the significations of the seventh. If you can do the sixth house stuff, you can do the seventh house stuff. Just like life throws us into the grimiest and the most difficult part in our relational dynamic with others. And then it says, all right, now that you know how to serve others, now let's figure out in the seventh house how you can just cooperate, be a little bit more mellow. Now you have reciprocity. Now there's you and the other person. How do you negotiate back and forth? So we can see how the 6 is supporting the 7th. And then there's another factor too. 7th house is the house where we die, not literally in a literal sense of we die, but this is the house where the sun sets. So it's talking about death and disappearance. The 6th house signification within it also has this notion of creating illness, deducing from health, and supporting death. So it's trying to undo the self, and it's getting it prepared again for the 7th house to go through that ending and death process. So we can see everything about the 6th house is supporting the 7th. Now, when we move to the other side of the anchor point of the 7th house, where we have the 8th, suddenly you merged, you got married in the 7th house. You're like, oh my God, I'm so much like my partner. We've created this union. And then it comes to a point where you're arriving to your midlife crisis. You're like, I don't know where they begin and where they end and where I start and I end. There's a lot of confusion about what is yours. Who are you? Like, what am I? Where do I begin and end? In the 8th house, it starts to put us through a transformative process where everything that was merged in the 7th house becomes something now that you possess, you have taken, and it's also putting you through a differentiation process where you come out of the 8th house very different than how you entered it in the 7th house. So it's again taking away from that whole process of the 6th and the 7th house, which was trying to bring us into relation with other and merge. The 8th house is forcing us to go through a differentiation process and understand what it means to now take from others for ourselves again. And it's about shared resources, taking from others, inheritance. 7th house is about death. 8th house is about rebirth, regeneration of the life force. It's also a house of sex and how the egg and the sperm meet and that cellular division becomes another human being. Is talking about that transformative power that's regenerating again. It's undoing the death that happened in the 7th house. So it's negating the significations of the 7th house as the house that is above the 7th house.
Yeah, I guess a lot of people might just be confused, but I know you did say it, is like when you talk about the 7th and death, they're like, oh, is it literal? But you did mention it, so I guess.
Yeah, no, it doesn't have to be literal, it's even when you marry someone, it is the death of you.
A
But
lot of exactly, I was gonna say that a lot of people would joke that when they got
yes,
married.
and they died,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's a kind of a cultural joke that goes across all cultures. It's like the day that you got married, you disappeared. And in astrology, the beautiful thing about it is that it's describing the cliche, but it's also giving us a reason why we die. It's
Not literally.
no, it's not literal. It's your personal identity of me, I, what was happening in the first house. Look at me. It's all about me, my needs. Like you do that in the 7th house, you will get a divorce, and that's another ending, right? The
Mhm.
7th house is also saying if you don't know how to die and merge and unify with another person, that thing that you're trying to build in the 7th house will die. This is what's symbolically beautiful about astrology. There's no way out of the 7th house without some sort of a death. And it doesn't mean literal death of the body, but it is the literal death of the self-identity, the way that it was groomed in the first half of life, because you've chosen to merge with another person.
Okay.
I think that's how it should be taken. But when you look at literal death too, sometimes you'll see people's literal death being related to 7th house, but more often than not, the 7th house is empty. It takes a lot more than just saying, oh, something's in the 7th house or something's gonna die. I wish astrology was that simple. It's not. Yeah.
So is it also like if you have most of your planets like from 6 onwards, 6 to
Yeah.
12, that
Yeah.
also shows that more of your life purpose on this is for others?
Yeah, let's say you have like a stellium in the 7th house in 6, 7, and 8. It's saying a lot about your life's path being very much interconnected and you having to have to negotiate much of your life in relation to other people and in your relational dynamic. If most of your charts are in the private sector of your chart, like 3, 4, and 5, There's a
Mhm.
lot of psychological development that needs to take place, a lot of growth in that aspect of life. So you're going to be going back and forth a lot with your own family of birth, your own family of making in later part of life, or maybe the skills and the toolkit that you're trying to build in this life, your abilities, your knowledge comes out of the fifth house. So how you get educated, how you love, how you are in relational dynamics. If you have a lot of clusters in the public sector of your chart, 9, 10, and 11, is saying something about so much of your narrative in this lifetime being constructed around in terms of what you want to do or are doing within the social context and within society at large. You're supposed to be here, and life's not going to feel so personal in terms of the private sector of your chart. You're trying to get away from there and go into the public. When you have a lot of planets just focalizing on one area, it's saying something very profound about life experience in general. That's why I was saying we have to be aware of how we cast our gaze on a chart, even that initial introduction to the chart, get our attention in a specific way based on these anchor points and what's happening around them.
Okay.
And then to go to the last anchor point, which is the 10th house, this is now the public sphere of our lives, like our career, our status, fame, power. The 9th house is supporting the 10th house. It's the house below the 10th house anchor point. And it is a house about how do we contribute to society based on our knowledge, our learning, our values, our ethics, our morals. It's everything that we have learned is how do we now parent, teach. So it's starting to carve our place within the social sphere of life. And in the 10th house, it's like the 10th house can rest on what we've learned and who we've become in the 9th house. And so much of our career comes out of what we know, what our knowledge is, what kind of ethics and morals do we have, you know? So it comes to support all the significations that are related to the 10th house. We're trying to be there for society. We're trying to be there for the larger social structures, the 9th and the 10th house. As we move to the house above the 10th house, which is the 11th house, again, is deducing from the significations of the 10th house in a lot of ways, because now we're taking it in terms of how do we take from society so that we enjoy ourselves, is how do we enjoy society, is no longer about contribution to it, like the way the 9th house was, and the 10th house is like, how do we regulate it in terms of giving it a structure. The 11th house is now taking something from it. So it's changing the direction of the 10th house again. Like the 10th house has to do with governments, authority figures. In the 11th house, things are becoming a little bit lighter again. It's becoming a little tribal. It's becoming more communal. It's not focusing so much on the larger structures of society. It's segmenting it again in the 11th house. So it's deducing from the powerful aspect of the 10th house, which is the totality of the government and the structure and the country. We can see again, the 11th house is taking almost from the 10th, is deducing from the 10th.
Yeah,
It's
I guess
diffusing it again. Sorry, go ahead.
the 11th house is diffusing it.
Yeah.
Yeah, the 9th house is supporting it.
Yeah. Like the 10th house wants the patriot for the country. The 11th house diffuses that into subcultures, subcategories within society. So it's like, I enjoy myself here. I'm not about just this overarching statement of power in the 10th house. It's the 11th house has that kind of a feel. So it starts to take away from that centrality and that powerful position of the 10th house.
So can you just give a general example like you did with the 4th?
So like in the 10th house, because it represents the more powerful central, let's say governmental kind of structures, for example, it's creating a component within society where it's going to fund cultural activities, for example, like theater and arts, fine arts, things of this nature. In the 11th house, different kinds of subgroups based on their own interest and what is enjoyable to them will ask for particular kind of funding and then create these segments where they can just go and do their own thing. They're trying to extract from the resources of the 10th house to be able to do something for themselves. It's taking something that is whole and central in the 10th house and fragmenting it almost in the 11th house so that it can be enjoyed. It's just
Okay,
like,
but could it be like you're working in the 10th house and through that now you're socializing in the 11th?
yeah,
so
you
you're-
could say that, yeah. Your
Okay.
career makes you money and then the income of it is coming out of the 11th house. Now you
Okay.
go buy yourself a brand new cell phone. But
Okay.
I don't want to take it there simply because it's still the part of the chart that is talking about society in general.
Okay, so could it also
It's
be
not
you
an
make
individual desire. Do you know what I'm
No,
saying?
but
It's
you make a lot of
collective
money
desires.
and you start like a foundation?
Yeah, you could start a foundation, yeah, but there has to
That's
be a
for
sense of
society.
enjoyment in it.
Yeah, but a lot
Yeah.
of people, I think they have a
Yeah.
desire for, like a lot of these philanthropist people, it's their passion is they're given like the resources.
Yeah, but philanthropy comes more in the 10th house because the 12th house because it's draining your resources. You're just giving away money, right? But you
Oh.
can become a connoisseur of some sort in the 11th house.
Or like an art connoisseur. Okay, like art
Yeah.
or wine or
Yes, food. I don't
Yeah.
know.
collector. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Cars.
But if we think about all of these things, they are all a kind of a subculture, right? We might think of them in terms of individually, I enjoy this, but you individually enjoy a segment of society and a subculture within the larger society that appreciates the same things you do. That's the 11th house. Car manufacturing as a whole, as an industry, as a powerhouse of an industry, we could say is in the 10th house. But in terms of now the car enthusiasts and the car subculture and how people come together to do drag racing or whatever it is that they do that they enjoy in that subculture will come in the 11th house. It's decentralizing the 10th house. That's what the 11th house is doing. And that's why it's that fragmentation of the 10th house that's happening in the 11th house is taking from the power significations of the 10th house. Yeah, so I guess in summary, we could say that the houses below are feeding the anchor points, and then the houses above are taking and trying to feed themselves from the anchor point, and their purpose is to redirect us in a different way. So let's get on to the next way of how we can cast our gaze on a chart on the houses and read them. So we have 12 houses, and we can look at these 12 houses in terms of axes, and we have 6 of them. So we go from 1st to 7, 2nd to 8, 3rd to 9, 4th to 10, 5th to 11, 6th to
Whoa, slow down. Okay, 1st to 7.
That's one of the axes, yes.
2nd to 8.
Yes, that's another axis.
Okay, you're going across. Okay, sorry, I didn't actually understand what you were doing because you were like one. Okay, now I get it. Yeah. So they're basically
Yeah.
the opposition. Yeah.
Yes, it's like the opposition of
Okay.
that
Of
house.
the chart, but because you were just calling them
Yes.
out so quickly that people. I was like, is she talking? What is she talking? Okay, so 1 and 7. 1 and 7 are looking at each other about like
I
around.
think it's the coffee.
Okay, 2 and 8.
Yes, 4 and 10.
And then you've got 3.
Oh, sorry. 1 and 7, 2 and 8, 3 and 9, 4 and 10, 5 and 11, and then 6 and 12. So
Okay.
that's 6 sets in the chart.
Yeah,
right?
and I think we did a video of one of our videos of looking at the chart that way.
Yes,
Saturday.
Mars.
Oh, okay, Mars.
So let's start with, we're going to cover these 6 axes. So the first one, 1 and 7, first house represents the self. The 7th house represents the other. So it's talking about inherently as a human being, we are involved in this dynamic, whether we like it or not, especially as social beings. It's about how do we establish our own sense of self and identity in the first house? And how do we also negotiate with the 7th house where it's about others and give ourselves to others and compromise and cooperate? And when you have, let's say, planets in the 1st and the 7th house, there will be a natural inclination, especially at the beginning of life, to gravitate towards one or the other. And the point always with all the axes is to establish some sort of a middle ground. Is like the teeter-totter. You're supposed to balance it in midair, not let one side become lump-sided. It's basically when we look at these axes, they're trying to tell us something about the art of life. How do we maintain the middle point where we have a sense of self and we can have a healthy relationship with others? And the funny part is, as social beings, other people control our nervous system. So how we interact with them is how they're automatically and immediately going to react to us. And then they're going to determine how we feel about ourselves. They become a mirror to the way that we behave in the world. So in a sense, we have to learn this kind of self-moderation in a sense to be able to have the integrity of the self, but at the same time to also be about others and be inclusive and include them. So the seventh house axis is always talking about this kind of a dynamic. In a sense, it's talking about how do we become self-aware through the others and how can we as an individual behave so others become aware of us in a healthy way and we establish a healthy relationship with other people. So this is one of the things when we have first house and the seventh house interacting with each other, we can cast our gaze on it in that way, look at it initially in the most basic and fundamental way in that kind of a way. So now when we go to the second and the eighth house, that axis, we're talking about the security paradigm, okay? Because it all has to do with resources and how do we generate and regenerate ourselves. So in the second house is all about how do we receive support. It's kind of a giving supports in a very willing manner. Whereas in the eighth house is about how do we take the support? How do we take from other people for our own benefit? In the 12th, we're kind of giving it. In the eighth, we're taking it. Again, this requires a balance in life too. We have to graciously be able to receive and graciously give, graciously take. So this is another thing that comes to be a theme in this axis about our possessions and our sense of security. Yeah, it's kind of about finding a balance between personal ownership and also having trust in other people, because the eighth house is in the house of others, you know, and the second house is in the sector of the chart that is about the self. Yeah, and then it's very important when there are planets in this kind of in this axis to understand like our resources bring a particular kind of a power dynamic, and when you have planets in these two houses in the spectrum of the chart, there's a lot of power dynamics at play regarding resources, money, and what that means and what that translates, how that transforms our lives. So it requires emotional intelligence in a lot of ways to understand how to negotiate this art of give and take in this life. So this axis is talking about that. So when we go to the third house is about how do you acquire skills? And then in the ninth house is about how do you take those skill sets that are now part of your higher knowledge and your wisdom and contribute back to society. So it's going between practical knowledge and higher knowledge. It's going from learning how to speak and write to how do you accumulate bodies of knowledge that can now contribute to society. So it's going again from this individual and practical in the third house to the more social aspect of the world in the ninth house. So when we have planets in this spectrum of the chart from the third to the ninth house, it's saying something about how do we gain the skill sets? What kind of skill sets do we need to gain? What do we need to do in this life to build our toolbox in order to be able to contribute back to society? So in a sense, the third house is how do you fill your cup to be able to fill other people's cup in the ninth house. There has to be a balance between this. Like people who constantly just want to do for themselves and there's nothing that they will ever contribute back, they create a kind of an asymmetry in their own lives and within society, within their own social dynamic in every way that you can think of it. So there has to be something that we've gained that we got to give back in the ninth house. We got to be able to teach it, give it, somehow contribute back to society. So there's a shift from the mundane to the more profound and what pertains to the collective from the third to the ninth. Then the collective being society, how do we contribute to it? And the third house is about how do we understand? And in the ninth house, our understanding should become so good that now we can extract meaning and designate purpose to things. So it's talking about our realm of horizon and our understanding in the world, if we actually think about it. Should I move to the next axis? This one's moving fast. This is nice.
Well, I think it's moving fast because like otherwise you're going to be going into like if we do more videos with all these examples, then you link them all below.
Yeah. And this is just the way that how we can cast our gaze on a chart, you know, because you have planets sitting in that way. This is one way of interpreting it too. So it's important to keep that in mind. That's why we're not getting into the nitty gritty of what each house signification is. It's just a generality. So now we go to the fourth house, which is the private life, and the 10th house, which is about our public life. So we're talking about how do we get rooted inside ourselves in the fourth house? and then able to extend that rootedness out again into the social world to have a social standing. And this is very clear when to maintain that balance. It's clear to see when people don't have this. For example, someone gets tremendous amount of fame, which is the 10th house, but they don't have that private sphere, that home life where they have people who can keep them rooted, and they just get uprooted and start floating around aimlessly in the 10th house, and they lose themselves. And the 10th house has a signification which has to do with movement because it's a windy house. In order to actually be a central figure and to be that authority figure with power in the 10th house, we need a very good 4th house. We need to feel rooted within ourselves. We need to feel grounded in the 4th house. So this dynamic of the 4th and the 10th is just demanding of us to be well rooted within so that we can be that authority figure and occupy that position of power in the 10th house. It's talking about this kind of a balance, this axis. So our emotional core has to be healthy in order for us to have a external and outer expression of it out in the world that can be of positive power and be a positive authority figure. So when we come to the 5th house and the 11th house axis, the 5th house is a house where we express ourselves individually and to our immediate environment. In the 11th house is a house that we also come to express ourselves, but to, let's say, a community, a subculture, on a stage in front of other people, and we get acknowledged for it. So we got this kind of a dynamic of, for example, how do you create and what do you create comes in the 5th house. And then what the fruit of your labor is going to go in the 11th house, such as your incoming gains or making an economic instrument out of your creations, for example, that happen in the 5th house. It's got this, again, this notion of creativity and enjoyment comes to have a more immediate and a personal component in the 5th house, and the expression of it that goes into the public goes into the 11th house. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then when we think about it, let's say I paint something or I compose a piece of music that goes from the 5th house, the creation of it happened in the 5th house. In the 11th house, the virtue of the fact that now it's being played in the radio, on the radio, or it's being exhibited in a art gallery, other people are getting to enjoy that. So the fruits of our labor is not necessarily always in terms of dollars and cents, but it's also how we're contributing back to society where society can now enjoy. We're creating culture in the 11th house in a lot of ways. So that's a component in this spectrum or axis. Now, two of the three of your favorite houses, 6 and 12.
I got a strong 6, 8, and 12 axis, but it's they're intertwined somehow.
The 6th house, that side of the spectrum, is about the most practical aspects of life, and the 12th house is about the transcendent. So the practical to the transcendent. What does that mean? The 6th house is the most practical routines of your everyday life, for example.
Taking out the garbage.
Take out the garbage, brush your teeth, brush your hair, groom the dog, take the dog out. They need to pee. Go to work, fill those papers, file those papers, listen to your boss. You have to do this at 5 o'clock on every Monday, for example. So it's about how do we engage with the everyday material, most grimy, practical aspects of life. That's what the 6th house is about. And the 6th house has a lot of details in it. It's like taking, when you take a blank page, there's nothing on it. And then those papers that have grids, what are they called? They have a particular name.
Oh yeah, we used to
They
use
use
it.
them in math class.
Yeah. Isn't it just called grid paper?
Let's just call it grid paper because I cannot, the word's not even coming.
Is there another word for it?
Yeah, there's graphite paper, I think.
Oh, graph paper.
Yeah.
I think it's called graph paper. We used to have to do graphs. Yeah.
Yeah. So 12th house looks like this. And then a blank piece of paper, there's nothing in it. There's no segmentation. There's no differentiation. You can't say where something begins and ends. It's as if everything's merged into one and it's just one thing. There's no differentiation. The 6th house is like that graph paper, graphite paper. Everything is segmented, differentiated. you have an errands list, you have to finish everything, or things will fall behind, or consequences. In the sixth house, I mean, that's the sixth house. In the 12th house, you wish that you had a schedule. You wish that you had time separating the morning from the afternoon, from the evening, from the night. It's just everything's just melded into each other. And this also makes life very difficult. The sixth house is a house of work. 12th house is a house of bed pleasures. So you can rest and you can sleep. And we know that this too requires a middle point in life. People who are all about work and no rest will eventually get sick, the sixth house. People who are resting too much, sense of self starts to disintegrate. The 12th house can represent mental illnesses and just not feeling well and feeling drained. So we need to get activated and engage with life, which is the sixth house. So again, when we have planets in this spectrum, we need to figure out the art of life in terms of work and rest, fantasizing, dreaming, conjuring up things about how we want to do things in life, and in the sixth house actually do them and put in the work. Otherwise life doesn't go anywhere. So again, we need to strike this balance between the 6th and the 12th. And then in terms of spirituality too, even when we look at monks or we look at people who we deem as most spiritual, they have a very strong 6th house ethics. They do the rituals in a particular way. They recite the mantras at a particular time in a particular way. They're doing the 6th house stuff. And by connecting to the material in that way, they're able to have that transcendence in the 12th house. So people who think just because I have things in the 12th house, they're going to get moksha, it's like, no, you have to also engage with the 6th house matters in the ways that it needs to be, because you are this tangible material thing in the world, and you have to navigate through this in order to get transcendence. So this access still needs to be balanced. We can't abandon them. Like, in
Well, most people would assume that you're supposed to just actually not do, like, if their goal is to get moksha and liberation,
yeah,
they would assume like, okay, I'm giving up all my money, I'm giving up everything, like I'm not supposed to even be enjoying life. So you're saying you
But when
actually
we
have to go
look
through
at
the nitty gritty.
Yeah, but when, like, think about people who are not just verbally in the act of spiritualizing themselves and trying to understand the spirit of the world. They don't create this duality between the material and the spiritual. To meditate for a certain amount of time requires your physical body to be disciplined as it's needed in the 6th house, to sit and to do that. To do the cleansing beforehand, to do it afterwards. These are all 6th house routines and matters, right? We have to differentiate the difference between, I'm going to be really blunt here, between being a coward and being lazy and not wanting to do anything, and then wanting spirituality, whereas spirituality is actually a demanding act and it's opposing it and it's sitting across the 6th house for a reason. It's not just about not doing things and not engaging with the material world, but it's to do the right activities, to do the right work so that one could eventually transcend. I don't take care of any of my responsibilities. I've abandoned everything. So I'm practicing spirituality. I'm moving towards moksha. I don't know how that makes sense. That's like making a joke out of spirituality in a lot of ways. It's
But I
probably the
think
hardest thing a human being can do.
But I think most people just assume when they think of moksha or like even in the Buddhist tradition, right? Like you picture giving up all your clothes, all your money, everything, and going to the mountains. That's the like layman's assumption is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it's a pretty bad assumption, because if we pay attention, if you don't work, that means you don't eat. Even if you don't want to engage in a 9 to 5 and you don't want to make money the way you would have to go to work in the 6th house, you still have to attend to your garden, which is a hell of a lot harder than a 9 to 5 to grow food all around the year. And then there's scarcity of food, to be disciplined in those seasons that no food grows so that you eat less so that you can sustain yourself. So the work never ends. And when you look at monks and you look at people who are actually and truly on that path, they live very disciplined, routine lives. All the rituals, all the kind of discipline that they need is the 6th house. They're doing it all the time. They wake up at a certain time before sunrise. That's something. That's for a lot of people, waking up at 3 a.m. is
Yeah,
not a
that's
joke.
the big hour. There's a name for it. I forgot what the
Yes.
name. Yeah, what it's like.
You wake up at 3 a.m. and you do a few hours of meditation and mantra reciting and all the rituals that are necessary. Some monks have to go and get alms in order to be able to eat and to support the monastery and where they do actually sleep and what they're actually wearing. So the work never ends. And the 6th house and the 12th house is telling us they're very much interrelated, and you can't separate this notion of spirituality from being a material existing entity in this world. It just doesn't work that way. We got to strike that balance somehow. And even if it's not a concept of spirituality, just the fact of work and rest is something that a lot of people have to learn the art of it. Some people rest too much and don't work enough. Some people work too much, don't rest enough. What's the new motto in our day? I'll sleep when I'm dead. I don't know how new it is. I think it comes from some literature, some writer, I'm sure, a while ago, but you hear that a lot. Like, I'm an entrepreneur. I don't sleep. I only sleep 3 hours a night. I'll sleep when I die. You're going to get sick and die pretty fast because you got to learn how to balance this axis between 6 and 12. So these were the 6 axes and some of the ways that we can look at the chart, especially if we have planets opposing each other in this way. When we cast our gaze on a chart, they're demanding of us to find some sort of a middle point, understand how to negotiate the spectrum. And one of the overarching theme between these axes, it goes from the self, from our individual self to the others and to the larger social structures of society. And again, astrology is beautiful to symbolically represent this because we are not solitary beings, we're social beings. So society makes us, and we make society, and we're in constant interaction. Our internal self is in constant interaction with the external world. It gets a reaction, it reflects on us, it changes us. That change allows us to interact in a different way again externally, and the dance goes on and on and on. So it's telling us something about that interiority and the self relative to what's external to the self, these axes, because they end from 1 to 6. As soon as we move into the house of others, we have already covered all of them in the house, in the sector related to the self and the private sphere of the self. They have already connected to the other and society. So that's something to remember. And how do we find the middle ground to compromise the self, the internal with the external? Does that make sense? Okay. What time is it?
8:26.
All right. I think we're going to have to leave the last 3 for the next episode, which we're going to talk about primary and secondary motion. So look at the chart going sequentially forward, clockwise and counterclockwise and clockwise. And we're going to look at the 4 goals of life and the primary aspects. I think that's good for today, no?
Yep.
All right.
Sounds good.
Okay, so we'll wrap it up here. In the next video, we'll cover those 3 gazes that we can cast on a chart. That's it for now. Much love. Till next time.